Let's get to the first thing I wanted to do tonight before we play some games. I just released the top 50 earlier this morning, and boy, them comments already, man. There's, just the proof that I read them. I got a lot of people who are like good list, good top 50. These are my favorite cards and all that. But I also have a lot more like pushback on certain entries or non-entries this time around. So I wanted to kind of go through some cards that weren't on my list and a couple that were real quick, kind of rapid fire, before we get to the games tonight. And hello, YouTube chat. Say hello, YouTube. You're on YouTube right now. So let's look first at 3 cards that didn't make my top 50. And everyone is at I swear, 40% of the comments naming cards are about these first 2 cards. But all I really have to say is that they were on the sleepers list. Insidious Fungus wasn't on the top 50 because it's on the sleepers list. But seeing now how many people specifically pointed that card out in the comment section just so far in the first 5,000 views, and it'll probably get 4 times that many before it's all said and done. Just seeing the amount of people already pointing this out in the comment section, it's maybe it wasn't a sleeper. Maybe everyone knew about this. I just didn't see much hype about it. But yeah, everyone expected to be top 50. If it wasn't the top 50, it might be in my top 15 cards in the set. It's very good, but instead it was in my top 3 sleepers in the set. So if you're looking for this card, go check out the sleepers video. Same thing with Wandering Rescuer. A couple people have asked about this card in the comment section of the 50. This is a good Magic card. I think it's actually quite good. My opinion of it has only gone up as, the preseason goes on here. We haven't got to touch these cards yet, but the more I look at it, the more I think okay, here's another 6 game states where this is really good. It's there's so many use cases for the card, and a lot of them are pretty simple, but the most simple use cases are often going to be the best. And this thing hits super hard, and it comes down for only a couple of minutes. It can be free some of the time, saves your dudes when it does come down because they tap to convoke it. I've heard people talking about this card seeing play in Modern. I don't know about that, but I do think in Standard it's probably got some things to do. So that's why it's on the sleepers list. It's on the sleepers list. So if you're looking for these cards, that's where they are. Same thing, last card in this vein is Charforer and Warp Space. I think Charforer is very good. I think Warp Space is even better, even though they cost a good amount of mana. I've only had a couple of people asking about where's this card? It was my number 1 sleeper in the set. Spoilers for the sleeper video, but saw a few people in the comments be like, man, I'm watching all your preseason content and I largely agree with you, but where's this card? Where's that card? And it's you didn't watch the sleepers video or else, or else you would know where these cards were. And yeah, I just wanted to address these 3 cards real quickly. They're all on the sleepers list. Watch the sleepers list because every season I notice a massive view deficit between the top 50 and the sleepers list, which I think the sleepers list is a better and more entertaining list for a lot of reasons than just the top 50. So watch the sleepers list, man. That's every season I get comments on the top 25 or the top 50. Right? Where's this card? And the answer 8 times out of 10, right, is usually it's on the sleepers list. But let's move into some cards that weren't on my list, on any of my lists at all. And talk about those for just a second, because a couple of these I do feel maybe should have made the list, and I feel kind of bad, especially given some of the things that did make the list that I really like. So let's look first at Altenac the Thrice Called. This is the 7 mana 9/9 trample that you can kind of just get for free due to say its name. We'll look at that card in a second, but the cool thing about this is that it's ramp. It's 2 mana instant speed ramp in Standard, Pioneer, Modern, and Explorer. And yeah, I think it might actually be good in all 4 of those formats because, you fetch a land, in Modern, you fetch a land on turn 1, and then on turn 2, again, instant speed ramp, brother or sister. It's unbelievable, dude. And then later you can just get it back for free, basically, with Say Its Name. This is the thing where you mill 3, and then you return a creature or land from your yard to your hand, which is already okay card selection. You don't have to hit one of the cards that you milled. It could be anything in your graveyard that was already there. And you exile this and 2 other cards named Say Its Name to just play Altenac. You can search your graveyard, hand, or library for Altenac and just throw it onto the table. So it doesn't have to already be in your graveyard. It can be in your library. It can be in your hand and you throw it down. But mostly because of this ability, pay 2, discard it, and ramp from your graveyard. I think this could actually be a really, really good, 5-card sort of package that in terms of opportunity cost, you're locked into playing 5 cards in your deck, and that's not good. So don't get me wrong, but I do think some decks might like it as far back as that format. I've already seen like 3 other people say that in the last 2 days since I released the top 50. One of them, Aspiring Spike, who I respect quite a bit. And I think that they are sort of talking me into this card in far back formats like Modern. And I think that especially even in Standard, like it's got a real chance. So I should bring it up because that discard ability is very, very, very good. Aside from that, though, Bill Merc Leech, man, I love this card so much, but I just, God bless it, could not find room on the list for this anywhere. I had a couple of people bring it up in the comments section too, for good reason. You know, I've talked about this card on Twitter and stuff. During preview season, I talked about how much I loved it. You know, it's just 2 mana for a 2/2 with Eerie. And whenever you Eerie, each opponent loses a life. That's sick, dude. Like, that could be playable in Commander. That could be playable in Pauper because it's a common, right? So be on the lookout for it there. There might be cool setups. But even in Standard, I think like it's okay. You know, it's not whenever you cast an enchantment. So you can like copy enchantment creatures or just copy enchantments. There's a way of doing that too, right? You could do like 3 blind mice setups where you end up copying the 3 blind mice. You know what I'm saying? Like every single turn you copy 3 blind mice, and that'll give you an extra ping every turn. But there's like plenty of ways to either copy enchantments or just play like, you know, Hopeless Nightmare, Tiny Bones joins up and like deal a bunch of damage to them that way. Cause what is that? 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 damage, 3 cards, you know? I think that Leech is a pretty good card, but I don't know if it's going to be truly back-breaking anywhere. Although I do, it's my favorite little buddy, you know, so I wanted to put it on the list, and maybe I should have like had 5 honorable mentions because it would have made that. But I want to make it known that I'm very aware of this card's existence and super excited about it. There's also Brood Spinner, which was on my underrated cards list when I talked to Power Dragon, but it's like nowhere else really, you know. 2 mana for a 2/3 reach with a good ETB trigger that helps out multiple decks, you know, Reanimator, Delirium, Insidious Roots, and other self-mill decks and stuff like that. And then this ridiculous instant speed and, you know, playable trigger where you can get like 4 flying guys, you know, and that's like in the middle of what you can get. You don't even have to have Delirium. You can get 2, 3 flying guys. That's okay, especially if he's on his way out anyway. But you know, on the upper end of this, you can get like 6 to 8 is the top end, flying guys off this dude. And I think he's very good, but he didn't make my list anyway, or either. And I specifically had a section for uncommons that I think might be like really relevant in Standard, but you know, that has like Ride of the Moth and stuff on it, like cards that I think will form the basis for whole new decks. And Brood Spinner is not necessarily in that particular league, but I still think that it's a very good card. And like, maybe I should have squeezed it in with like the Piggy Bank and Wildfire Wickerfolk entry. Like here's another 2 mana, 5 total PT creature. You know, they're all good in this set, I guess. But yeah, I think this card is like fantastic. I think it's wildly strong and will shore up the 2-drop slot in like multiple decks. So I think maybe like Sultai Reanimator even likes it. I think this card's very good. That's all I'm saying. Clockwork Percussion is again playable all the way back to perhaps Modern. But in Standard, this is a 1-drop artifact creature, which means that, you know, it attacks pretty well. It's got haste. It's a Raging Goblin. So it'll deal some damage to your opponent, but it also Gleeful Demolitions really well. Because like Gleeful Demolition and draw a card, get your 3 Gobos or whatever it is, get your 3 guys. And that's really, really good, man. Like at the floor of this card, you chump block with it, and it still like kind of draws you a card. Aristocrats decks that are red-black like probably really, really like this card too. So for 1 mana, this is kind of one of the most perfect versions of this effect. If it had a more relevant creature type of any kind, I keep seeing people say if this was a goblin, this would be like even better. And they're right. But like, I feel like if this had any relevant creature type, it would just be like through the moon in terms of the value you can possibly get. But yeah, Boros Convoke, absolutely. I think this card is wonderful. Key 1-drop for those decks perhaps, but does more in even other decks than that. So I really, really think this is a special card and probably should have made the list. It's Pauper playable too, if that matters to you. And I don't know, it should a little bit if you're judging cards. Aside from that, this is kind of more a card that I wish was on my sleepers list than on my top 50, but I think Defiled Crypt and Cadaver Lab is actually kind of phenomenal. and it's mostly because of Cadaver Lab, but Defiled Crypt is kind of an Insidious Roots variant. You know, it's 4 mana for an enchantment. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2 horror creature token that triggers once each turn. So you only get it once per turn, but it's whenever cards leave your graveyard for like any reason. So like a land leaves your graveyard because you got it back with Analyst or whatever. It really doesn't matter. Like, you know, if an instant or sorcery leaves your card because you delved it away or something like that. If you use Ghost Vacuum or Lord Skitter to make a card leave your graveyard, instant, sorcery, planeswalker, does not matter. Leave your graveyard, you get a 2/2. And that's actually pretty good. You can do it on your opponent's turn and get the 2/2 as well. So I don't know, man. I kind of like Crypt, but even better, I think it's Cadaver Lab. It's a raised dead, a single black mana. When you unlock it, return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. So if you Cadaver Lab after Defiled Crypt, and it'll give you a 2/2 on top of the other value you get. But this is really good in Pixie. I'm pretty sure this is freaking phenomenal in Pixie, dude, because it's a single black mana for an enchantment. A raised dead that sits on the table and lets you like recover it later and put it back in your hand later is just, dude, I think that's crazy. Like, you know, after a couple of turns of Pixieing, your Deep Cavern will be, if you're playing Deep Cavern, that'll be in your graveyard. Your Pixie might be in your graveyard, right? So you play another Pixie and bring back Cadaver Lab, or, you know, bounce Cadaver Lab, then play Cadaver Lab to get your other Pixie back, play that, get your Cadaver Lab back, and now you just got like, you're playing Raised Dead on the same card like 4 times in the same game. I think that's really, really good. Get your Rotten Mouth Viper back after it dies, and your Rotten Mouth Viper is basically your like main win condition in that deck. So get back Rotten Mouth for 1 mana if you like draw into Pixie. It all seems really good to me, dude. I think this is a card you need to watch out for, is all I'm saying. Super, super sick because, again, like Raised Dead on an enchantment is so much better than you think it is. This can be sacrificed to a Braids or Disturbing Mirth or anything that wants you to sacrifice enchantments or lets you sacrifice enchantments. You can bargain it away in a similar vein. Just very good. It triggers Eerie as well. That might matter. I think Cadaver Lab's phenomenal. I really do think it is. Drag to the Roots up next. I didn't really point this card out, and I probably should have. I also didn't point out the 1 white mana, destroy target creature, and they manifest Dread. And those are both good cards. But I think people are freaking out a little too much about this, but I guess the farther back you go, when you do have, you know, fetch lands and cards like Stitcher's Supplier and stuff like that, it's much, much easier to enable Delirium in like Modern, for instance, or even Pioneer. So maybe that's where a card like this shines, and it's just like strictly upgraded Assassin's Trophy 9 times out of 10. Or strictly upgraded Abrupt Decay or whatever, you know, like that seems like it would be a good card, but I didn't point it out on the list just because I think that in popular builds in Standard, I think Urgent Necropsy is probably better than this, and some of the time I think Terra Sunder is better than this as well. And we already have Assassin's Trophy, so if you want this effect for 2 mana, you've got it, you know. So I'm not like as high on this card as a lot of other people, but I do need to admit that it's a good Magic card, you know. But Fear of Missing Out is up next. This is a pretty ironic one to not put on your list, right? Especially when, for multiple entries, I was like, look, I just don't want to miss this card. And I might miss out on Fear of Missing Out being on my top 50, and that might be a tragedy because, you know, this has a decent ETB trigger, a decent power toughness for its mana cost, right? And if you do have Delirium, which actually, again, the farther back you go is not hard to enable at all, even in like your aggro deck, you can get this, you know, getting you extra attack steps as early as turn 3 pretty easily. So, or even turn 2, you know, because you discard another copy of Fear of Missing Out, but on turn 1, maybe you played an instant or sorcery or did something that milled you some cards. And then starting on turn 3, you have all your mana available to mill whatever else you need to actually get Delirium. You can start getting crazy triggers with this. And I'm kind of impressed by some of the lines that I've seen in Pioneer and Modern with the card, but I'm not sure those lines are actually good enough. But we'll have to see. I think I may have missed this card on my list because I'm not that impressed by it, but I think I may be wrong to not be impressed by it. I guess is my point here. Glimmer Burst, quickly on this card. This was also something that almost made my sleepers list and didn't quite. But, you know, these 4 mana instant speed draw 2s with an upside have been okay over the last few years, especially depending on what the upside is or what other 4 mana draw 2s are in the format. And right now, there's not a whole lot of great 4 mana draw 2s. There just kind of aren't. Farsight Ritual, you know, people have been trying the 5 mana one to get you a Thopter and stuff. But this is get you 4 mana draw 2, get you a guy. A little bit like the card I was just talking about that costs 5, but Costing 4 is a world of difference from costing 5. We've all learned that. And this can be played like during their combat step, just like the 5 mana one, to get a blocker, which I think is cool. The 1/1 can crew vehicles, right? We've already seen how good a 1/1 token can be just with Mirex and Fountain Port. Maybe you don't have any other tokens, but you have a Caretaker's Talent out. So you Glimmer Burst, EOT, draw your 2 cards. Then when you go, you pay your 1 mana to copy the 1/1 token, draw a card off of the Caretaker's Talent. Like, these are all decent lines. I think this card might be like somewhat relevant. Also puts an enchantment into play for, you know, Eerie or whatever you're trying to do, Enchantress decks. And puts a Glimmer into play for things that care about that, which there's not a whole lot, but like it's worth pointing out, you know. But Grievous Wound is up next. I really like this card conceptually, and because I like fun, cool design on Magic cards, but I don't want that to be confused with a good Magic card. It's costs 5 mana for an aura that enchants a player. They can't gain life, and whenever the player's dealt damage, they lose half their life rounded up. A lot of can't gain life stuff in this set. It's kind of interesting, but I think this costs too much mana and doesn't actually do anything when you cast it. You know, you have to facilitate it in other ways. But I think it could be cute in certain builds, you know, if you can find a way to stall the board state till you can get this out. Untap with it in play. These are hard things to ask, by the way. Untap with it in play. And then maybe like Aftermath Analyst, a few of those deserts back into play that deal the damage to your opponent when they come to play. Ziggy is going crazy outside this door. I got to let him in. Hold on real quick. Think about the deserts deck while I'm gone. I'll only be gone for 5 seconds or slightly more. Hold on. I'm sometimes slow. My knee hurts. Takes me a second to get up. I'll be right back. Hold on. Discuss amongst yourselves. Here's the guy. He's right there. All right. So I also think that Iridescent Vine Lasher is probably potentially very, very good with this, right? Because for the same reasons the deserts are, and you'd play deserts in the same deck with Vine Lasher. So we got something cooking. There's something in the pot, but I'm not sure the water's actually boiling or the stove is on at this point. It works with Bloodletter of Aclazotz. I've said that guy's name like 50 times this previous season because so many things work with him, but this is another thing that if you have a Bloodletter out and you deal the damage to him, it kills them immediately. So all very cute, but I think it's too cute. It's slightly too cute. So, and yeah, this is dealt damage versus lose life. So effects that make them lose life won't trigger this. Keep that in mind, but effects that deal damage will. That said, if they're dealt damage, then they have lost life. So it's kind of a weird thing. So like it still works with Bloodletter, but it doesn't work with, you know, opponent loses 6 life or whatever it is, you know. But moving on, we're going to look at Huntwood Shrieker. This card's not on my list because I'm not that impressed, but I guess I do have to admit that in Commander, this has some fun playability because there's so many different ways to like put creatures face down. In Standard, we have Disguise, we have Manifest Dread, we have Cloak, right? So this could work with some stuff, you know. It's just 2 mana to flip anything up, and that's pretty good with, you know, Cryptic Coat and stuff like that. It's all right. And this, you know, obviously, when it attacks, will get stuff off your library. So the idea here is, I play Huntwood Shrieker, it survives a turn. Again, that's a hard ask some of the time. I play Huntwood Shrieker, it survives to actually attack and get that trigger. So it attacks, I Manifest Dread, and get a Vaultborn Tyrant on turn 4. And I can pay 2 mana to turn it face up on turn 4. At split second speed, not even instant speed, split second speed, I can turn it face up. And like, this is all like kind of neat, but I don't know that it's good enough. That said, I could be like super wrong on this. My buddy Power Dragon, whose opinion I respect greatly when it comes to standard playable stuff, really likes this card, and he got to play it for early access and made it look pretty good too. So I just want to acknowledge, could be wrong on not liking this card, but in a lot of ways it looks like a 3 mana 3/3 with no keyword abilities that doesn't do a whole lot else, and you have to wait till the next turn to do anything with it, and I don't know, man. I'm not like a huge fan, but it could be wrong. Yeah, that's somebody in chat tried to tell me, man. Power Dragon ran a crazy deck with this, and he did. I saw it in action, and that's kind of why I put the card in this folder. It's because I saw Quan running with it, and it looks very good. Irreverent Gremlin, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I think it might be good. 2 mana for a 2/2 Gremlin with Menace. Whenever another creature you control with power 2 or less enters, you can discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Triggers only once each turn. So, this could be sneaky good, right? For like Reanimator decks or again Delirium, anything that's trying to fill their yard, the discard might be great. And it's just kind of a 2 mana Takasia's Welcome effect in some ways that also has Menace. Like they slapped a keyword ability on it. So This could be a little sleepy. He looks a little sleepy. He's eating a lot. So many candles in his belly, but he'll take a nap. But I do think he's also an action, like a sleeper, kind of. It's one of those that I wanted on my sleepers list, not my top 50. Next is Layline of Mutation. I think some people were upset that like the red Layline's the only one that made the list. I do kind of like the white one. As I said with Pyroclasm, I didn't want to put cards on the list that are reprints, right? So with that, Layline of the Void didn't make the list. And then Layline of Mutation, though, I kind of did want this on the list and it didn't quite make it. I think Fist of Suns in Standard, or even like more Fist of Suns in Modern might be okay, but especially in Standard, you know, this is comparable to an Invasion of Zendikar, right? I play Invasion, I get my 2 lands, next turn I play Atraxa. Well, I play Leyline on turn 4, even if I have to play it out of my hand. Even if I have to pay mana for this. I play Leyline on 4, play Atraxa on 5. Or, excuse me, Leyline on 3, Atraxa on 4, right? Because I ramped into Leyline. But, yeah, I could totally see this working, like, pretty easily. And if you don't have to pay any mana for it, it's kind of nuts. Aspiring Spike, by the way, back to him. He had an argument for the card that I thought was really, really good. If you resolve Layline of Mutation or Fist of Suns or something like that, and then your opponent on your turn spends less mana than you spent on the card to disenchant it somehow, then that's tempo negative. But if you get free Fist of Suns to start the game and your opponent has to spend time and mana disenchanting it, then it's tempo positive. And I actually think that's an incredible point. I really do think that's a kind of the tipping point that made me like this card a little bit more and kind of think about it in Standard. I think this card's also quite good. I do. But next is Osseous Stick Twister. This is kind of a commander sleeper because note that it has lifelink. So if you also have Delirium, at the beginning of your end step, if there are 4 or more card types, you know what it means. Each opponent can sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. And then Stick Twister deals damage equal to its power to each opponent who didn't sack a permanent or discard a card this way. So since it has lifelink and each opponent, right, has to do this thing, then it can gain you 8 life. It can deal 2 to everybody and you gain 8 life. And that's just if its power is 2. So if you have ways of modifying its power, then suddenly you can deal like 3, 4, 5 to everybody if they don't sacrifice a thing. And in the meantime, it even if it's not dealing a bunch of damage to them, it actually does better than that. It forces a tough, decision on your opponent, or they might end up like coming down on board state or, cards in their hand to this card. And I feel like if somebody discards like 2 cards to this, then like, yeah, it was worth 2 mana. You know what I'm saying? So it sometimes like takes some hoop jumping to actually get Delirium, but I don't know, dude. I think this is definitely sleepy, like somewhat in Standard, but definitely in Commander. I think that this is a pretty decent card, and yet good with Braids, and just good alongside, you know what I mean? Like it does kind of the same thing in a way that Braids does. And I think that's really, really good. So I like Stick Twister, man. I'm going to try to play it in Standard and see what happens. But next is Peerpass the Veil. This is also on the sleepers list. I forgot to order this that way. But yeah, Peerpass the Veil is also on the sleepers list. It's one of the best cards in the set. I'm fairly convinced. This is one of the better cards in the entire set. It's on the sleepers list. Pyroclasm, again, should have put this like sort of in the beginning of this segment here. I talked about Pyroclasm in the honorable mentions, and my whole reasoning for putting it in the HMs is because I don't really like to talk about reprints on these lists, but I do need to bring up Pyroclasm somewhere because it's so good in Standard. And I still have some people in the comments that are like, dude, Pyroclasm's better than honorable mention. It's like, well, I justified it. But I know how many people scrub through these videos. You know what I mean? Like they don't actually get my justifications. They just see a card at a number and they're like, nuh-uh. It's like they don't even want to hear me out. I get why you would scrub through an hour and 10-minute video, by the way. So I don't fault you necessarily. But still, if there's a card that you're like, how come it's there? Then like watch the entry and like maybe I'll explain myself. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, I don't want reprints on the list. If I did have reprints on the list, both Pyroclasm and Ethereal Armor would be, somewhere in my top 20. This card is very impactful on Standard. But next is Tale of Tamamo. This card's a trap. This card's not. I just don't. Maybe I am super wrong. And if I am, I will take my L and probably several other L's. But I think this card's bad. I think this card's actively bad. Please, somebody out there prove me wrong. Or don't. Next is Under the Skin. A lot of people are just pointing this card out. I'm not that impressed by it. It's not Eternal Witness. It says permanent card. Eternal Witness is any card. Any card. Instant or sorcery included, and that's like such a huge deal. Such a huge deal, man. Also, you can't flicker this. You can't bounce this, right? There's no blinking involved. There's no reanimation of this card, or at least the creature, there's no reanimation. And like one of the best things about Eternal Witness is blinking and reanimation and bounce and play it again or whatever, you know? And they have completely taken that mode of playability off this card. I guess unlike a Witness, you can Snapcaster this back. Are you going to do that? No, I don't think you're going to do that. So I don't think this card's bad. I don't think this card's bad. I want to make that clear, but I don't know if this card is like good enough to point out and to call. Like I've seen no less than 10 people like between Reddit and YouTube and Twitter or whatever call this, like evoke the name of Eternal Witness when it comes to this card. And you guys know Honest Rutstein's in the format right now, right? It sees no play. You guys know that, oh God, I can't even remember the name of it and I loved it. That's standard brain for you, though. You use Gloom Shrieker. You guys remember Gloom Shrieker? Do you not remember Gloom Shrieker because it didn't see any play? Yeah. And you could blink that. You could bounce that. You could reanimate that. It still saw 0 play. So just like, I don't know, bro. I don't know, man. It's like, I guess you could blink it and it comes back as if it's a creature, it comes back as that creature, I think. But I'm just not a big fan of this card. I'm just not. So I just think we've had other things that look like E-Witness in the past that I've been kind of fooled by, you know, like I was really high on Gloom Shrieker for Kamigawa and card sucked. And I think this card kind of might also, but again, maybe something will prove me wrong. Maybe something will, man. Unstoppable Slasher. Yeah. A lot of people ask me why this card's not on the list. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's very good. I think it's just a 3-mana 2/3 Death Touch. I think, first of all, in its own color, Preacher of the Schism is a much better 3-drop. I think Gix is a much better 3-drop. I think Glissa is a better 3-drop in Golgari. I think that Sentinel of the Nameless City is a much better 3-drop in Golgari, and it hardly sees play. This is a gimmick. I think that some people miss this comma clause right here. If it had no counters on it, return it to the battlefield tapped during its owner's control. So if this gets +1/+1 counters for any reason, it won't come back, which makes it slightly worse with like map tokens and against Get Lost and stuff like that. You know, your opponent Get Lost or Shieldred. Now you don't want to put the map, you know, you don't want to burst the maps and put counters on this because it won't come back. So there's that. But there's also the fact that if your opponent like blocks up and kills it in combat and it dies, then it'll come back with the stun counters on it. By the way, that's massive tempo. 2 stun counters, 2 turns is forever. It's forever in a game of Magic. But apart from that, if your opponent can then kill it with Go for the Throat or something, then it won't come back. It'll just die and not come back tapped. And I think that I want to give people the maximum amount of credit, but I think some people are just missing this comma clause. If it had no counters on it. So I just think that makes it play like way worse than people think, right? And I'm aware that in that situation, it takes a blocker and a removal spell. Sometimes it takes 2 removal spells and you're up in terms of card advantage. But that's basically like ward, discard a card, which is good. That's fine. But my point is that I think there are just way better 3-drop options. And maybe in Mono Black or Golgari, you play a 1 of Unstoppable Slasher, but this is just not the kind of card you play a 4 of, or even a 3 of. I really don't think it's as good as it looks. I think Lord Skitter is a better 3-drop than this. I really do. So I'm just not seeing it. Is it better than Preacher? Yes. This card is absolutely, or is it better? Excuse me. Is it better than Preacher? No, is the answer to that. Preacher of the Schism is, I think, in my mind at least, way better than this card. And I could be shut up very quickly on that, but in my mind, without having played with the card, right? In my mind, I think Preacher is just much better. We'll move on to Vavas Onslaught. This really didn't make like any of my lists. You know, I wanted to talk about it a bit with Power Dragon, but this card I think is actually kind of good. This is one of those that I think people look at the casting cost and are like, oh, that's bad. You know, it costs so much mana. Well, it costs 3 mana or 5 mana or 7 mana or 9 mana or 11 mana. And once you get to 11, it's nuts. It's actually good. I don't know that any deck can make 11 mana that wants to play this card, but people forget that, like, you know, the green Virtue exists, the one that you tap lands and they make like thrice the amount of mana they would normally make. People forget that the Doppelgang deck exists, and like Doppelgang's always looking for a fresh young finisher, you know what I mean? So I think this might be a fun card for them to try to play, because they make, you know, 14 or more mana like pretty routinely in Doppelgang. So I don't know. I think it might have like spots, right? I think that 7 mana for 3 5/5s with versatility in terms of like how you cast the card is pretty good. I think that 5 mana for 2 4/4s with versatility is also okay some of the time. So I don't hate this. I think that it works with like Caretaker's Talent and stuff like that too. It makes some like big tokens for Caretaker's Talent to copy. And there's all kinds of reasons why you might want tokens in Standard right now, you know, Toby and stuff like that. So I think, especially Toby, right? Because if you have a Toby out, then if you have like 4 or more creature tokens and all your creature tokens have flying, so you get to a certain amount of mana, or you have a couple of tokens in play already, more likely. And suddenly these guys are huge and have flying if you have Toby out. And that's just one interaction. There's lots of cards that want tokens. So I don't know. I just got my eye on this, and I'm not sure that it's amazing, but I do think it's kind of fine. But next is, okay, these last couple of cards are the cards that did make the list, but I still feel like I have to say something about. One made the list, but it's like way too, you know, low, I guess, on the list. Like it's number 50 on the list, and people thought it should be like in my top 10. And then the other one is a card that's in my top like 15, and people thought it shouldn't be on the list at all. This one is split up. The one on your screen right now, you can read. You know what this art is. You've seen it. The art's really cool, by the way. But this was my number 50. And the way I justify my number 50, and I'm going to do it again, hate to repeat myself, but again, I think there are times where people just see my entry and they don't actually like, they just scrub through, or they don't like hear me really. My number 50 is always for a card that I have some faith in, but I also don't. It's the fence sitter entry, right? Is this card good? Is this card bad? I want to put it on the list because in case it's actually very good. Because sometimes cards look okay, or they look incredible, or they look terrible, and they're the complete opposite of whatever you think they are. And I have seen, oddly enough, I guess appropriately, kind of a 50-50 split of like how people feel about this card. Either it's an insane, busted 3-mana sweeper, one of the best 3-mana sweepers of all time, or it's dog water, right? It'll only ever kill like 2 guys. It won't ever kill all of your opponent's creatures because, you know, they just played creatures on their turn. And if you think they attack with all of their creatures every turn, you haven't played much Magic. That's not how Magic works, you know? So I kind of split the difference, again, puns intended, here, and made it my number 50 because I'm not sure which of those two groups I side with, but I side a little bit more with the people who don't like it that much. I don't think it's going to clean up every creature on the table. Summoning Sickness is a thing. Leaving creatures up to not attack and to block on the crackback, or creatures that are too small to get in, or whatever it is. These are things that happen in nearly every game of Magic. So I don't think this is like an unconditional 3-mana sweeper that wipes everything. And yeah, I know you can swing in with all of your guys and then choose untapped, but then, again, you're probably not going to get all the creatures you want to get off of this. I think that, you know, one of the points of a sweeper is that it's a 5-for-1 or a 4-for-1. And I don't think this is ever going to really be that. I think the Temporary Lockdown's probably better than this, like a lot of the time. I think especially when you're going to play it on curve in a game of Magic, like if you're playing it from turn 3 or 4 or whatever, Brotherhood's End could reliably be better than this in some situations. So I don't know, man. I don't know. It's not always going to kill the Deep Cavern Bat, even if you're only trying to pick up one creature with it. You know, it's not always going to pick that creature up. So, I mean, I guess you could make sure it does, but then that could screw you in various other ways, right? So I just think this card is like slightly harder to make work than it looks. I see a lot of people looking at this like it's, you know, going to be immediately not only the best 3-mana sweeper in Standard, but like the best 3-mana sweeper in Commander. And like, I don't know about that. I think you have to be a little more sort of realistic about what board states actually look like, you know, from turn 3 onwards in a game of Magic. You are just not going to hit the creatures you want to a lot of the time with this. And like, I don't feel bad for acknowledging that, but I still think the card could be playable. I do think the card could absolutely be playable. That's all I'm going to say. But Finally, the Roller Crusher ride. This is kind of the opposite. Everyone thought this card just shouldn't be on the list at all, or maybe it should be like my number 50 or whatever, because this card is terrible. And it's like, the card is good, guys. I'm telling you, the card is good. The same top comment that mentions, why isn't Insidious Fungus on the list? It's on the sleepers list. Also mentions that Roller Crusher ride is terribad. Why is it on the list? I don't like it. Whatever. I'm not quoting directly. I'm paraphrasing to be fair to them. But I think Roller Crusher ride is, I see a lot of people making the same mistakes they made with Meat Hook. And I know darn well that a lot of the people making that call were around for the Meat Hook Massacre. And I know it's not the same card. It isn't the same card as Meat Hook Massacre, Dev. Yeah, but it is a 3-mana enchantment that is fine to throw into play without X equaling anything. And it is fine for X to equal something, even if it makes the card cost a lot of mana, just like the Meat Hook Massacre. Like, people freaked out over the Meat Hook Massacre when it first came out. Everyone, I don't know if you were there, and if you were there, don't try to revise history, because a ton of people thought that card was poop, absolute poop during previous season. This card's bad, dude. Like, maybe you play it as a blood artist, but it's never going to kill anything. And then it came out and it got banned because it was so good. And I don't know if that's going to be the same story or trajectory for the Roller Crusher ride, but I do think this card is so much better than anybody else seems to think that it is. I have caped for this card multiple times in previous season already. I caped for it, in the conversation with Daquan the other day when me and Power Dragon were going back and forth. He actually thought this card was overrated, which I gotta say, everyone hates this card. So how is it overrated? I have to say that. But we had a long conversation about Ride, because I think this card is phenomenal. I really do. I think that if it's not turned on, you'd be surprised how often 5 mana deal 2 damage to 2 guys is good. You'd be surprised. If it is turned on, then suddenly it's 5 mana deal 4 damage to 2 guys. You know what that is? A one-sided sweeper. 6 mana deal 3 damage to 3 guys is one-sided Brotherhood's End. What do you want from a Magic card? If you are casting this for 6 mana, or 5 mana even, then I assume you have Delirium. So if you have Delirium and you cast this for 6 mana, that is 6 damage to 3 creatures. You win the game. You understand that the card works with itself, right? It's unbelievable. And it works with so many cards in Standard right now too. Everything from stupid stuff like Iridescent Vine Lasher, obviously, but it works with the 1-drop lizard that you swing in and it does a damage to them, and now it does 2 damage, right? And those are stupid moves that you probably shouldn't be doing. But it also works with deserts, right? Again, back on those, you play a desert and it does 2 damage to your opponent. That might be really good with Aftermath Analyst, could be a win condition and a sweeper at the same time. And those decks get a lot of mana, so they can Roller Crusher ride for X equals 5 or 6, fairly easily, guys. In those decks, they don't just have to play Ill-Timed Explosion anymore. Teamer Doppelgang and stuff like that. They can play Roller Crusher ride and Ill-Timed Explosion, giving them 2 sweepers and a card that makes their World Soul's Rage kill you in half the mana. You understand how good this card is? Even with Overlord of the Boiler Bilges, the red Overlord, well, now it does 8 damage when it comes into play and you win the game. You understand that if you have, again, back to Iridescent Vine Lasher, if this card is turned on and you Offspring an Iridescent Vine Lasher, play a Fabled Passage, pop it, go get another land, 8 damage, 8 damage, 8 damage in the game. This card is phenomenal. It's not hard to get Delirium. If it kills, wait. Okay, yeah, if it kills one of your opponent's creatures, I think it's kind of fine. I really kind of do, man. Yeah, the card has taken a lot of hate over this previous season, and I think that it will surprise you. I don't want to go too hard for this because I feel like if it's not good, then that's a major blot on my record or whatever, but I'm caping for it so hard because I'm fairly confident that the card is actually quite good. And people just look at it this isn't mono red playable. And it's no, it's probably not mono red playable. It's Jund playable. It's Naya playable. It's Teamer playable. It's something like that. This is a weird little mid-range kind of sweeper piece that also helps you, kind of hit your win condition or lowers the clock for you somehow or another. This is This is a good card. I'm not going to stake my entire reputation on it, but because, what else is there left to stake at this point? You have to be self-deprecating or other people will do it for you. But yeah, I think this card is phenomenal. And I'll kind of end it at that because I've already given you 20 minutes of content about this card all through previous season. I think you know that I think it's good. And if I haven't convinced you yet, then maybe the card will. Because if I haven't convinced you yet, I don't know if anything will, other than the card being successful in Standard. And I know Magic players. I know that the first week this can League 5-0 like 10 times and be in like a 500-person local Japanese tournament and win the whole thing. And like Magic players will still be like, I don't know. So I don't know what convincing it's going to take for some people, but I'm pretty sure this card is good. I really do. But that's it for the YouTube video portion of this. Twitch chat, stay on stream because I want to play some Magic. But if you're watching on YouTube, do the YouTube things. Like the videos, sub to the sandwich, hit up the Patreon. I'll take $1 a month. That's all I really ask from you. Helps out a lot, and I work really hard. But apart from that, I'm donezo for this one, YouTube, folks. So spread love and be kind.